I lead all of our product development efforts here at Meesho. So basically, product management, product analytics, UX design, user research, all of the core functions outside of engineering, which actually contributes to building products. Before Meesho, I've sort of again worked in product management in Amazon, Flipkart, and also spent considerable time in strategy consulting in McKinsey. And over the past couple of years, also I've started to talk a lot about product management, leadership, startups. These are topics that are close to my heart. There is a certain growth trajectory that almost all of these companies go through, right? Which is what is shown here. And if you look at the growth of these companies across time, then typically there are three phases. Again, I'm just simplifying here to make the point. So there is an early phase, which is more about finding product market fit, right? So does the product actually find an audience, and does it actually solve a problem for them? Is there value being created for that audience or those customers? So that's the early phase. A lot of rapid iteration is happening just to find product market fit. And a lot of startups, almost more than 90% of startups actually, unfortunately, don't cross this phase itself, the early phase. But the startups that do cross this phase, then comes the phase where typically hyper growth can happen, right? And again, not all companies grow in a very rapid fashion, but there are companies which sort of go through this phase where the business is growing very, very fast, right? So any metric that you look at, top line, revenue, customers, the kind of app downloads, right? So any metric that you look at tends to grow very, very fast, right? So this is the phase that we're calling hypergrowth. So just to put this in context, this is a phase where you see growth week on week in a meaningful sense. If you take a year's view, then the growth may be 10x, 20x, 30x, right? So I'm talking about that type of growth. So that's sort of the hyper growth phase. And then typically some of these companies then start to also mature, right? Which means that they have gotten so big and they've captured such a large share that the growth tends to then stabilize. So this middle part of this S curve is the hyper growth phase. And this is also the phase, by the way, where sort of the winners get separated from the losers, which means that in a particular industry, you may have multiple startups which go through this phase, but not everybody survives this phase, right? And that's where I think the companies that truly break out and become market leaders tend to survive this phase, and also tend to have people who understand how to navigate this phase. Any B2C business will always have, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's social networking, whether it is fintech focused on consumers, always has a lot of non-deterministic areas. So what do I mean by that? These are areas where it's very tough, one, to discover the problem. Second is, even if you figure out the problem, it's very, very tough to say what solution will solve that problem. In the e-commerce context, I think probably the most non-deterministic problem we have is how do you solve for what we call new user activation, right? Which means there is a customer who has never shopped online before, and that customer you have acquired through performance marketing and other channels. And that person has to figure out how to place the first order on the app because they have a lot of trust barriers in their head. They don't understand your UX. They don't know what to do when they come to your homepage. Like, how do you get that person to place an order? Right? That's an activation problem. It's very non-deterministic because here there is no workflow, like the supply chain example I gave. Here there is no way you can figure out anything. You can obviously look at data saying, hey, they came on the homepage, they go to some other page. You can analyze all of it. But often even that analysis doesn't lend itself to what solution you should build to actually solve this problem. And this is where I think a lot of intuition, product judgment, product sense, whatever term you want to use, comes into play. And what I've seen a lot of good product managers do is they build this intuition, they build this judgment by actually talking to users, trying to understand how they lead their lives, how do they engage with the product. They also try a lot of parallels from different industries, right? For example, if this new user activation is an e-commerce problem we're solving, how is it solved in some other industry? Suppose you're in a music app like Spotify. Like, how do they How does Spotify understand what music would you like, right? What do they do to actually solve that problem? But the way, at least, I try to define speed is not so much about just how much time it took for you to build a feature. I think that's important, but here it's more about the time. How do you minimize the time between observation and reaction, right? Which is the time when you observed a user insight, you observed something in data, to the time you actually launched an experiment to validate or invalidate. That is the time between observation and reaction. And the reason why minimizing this time is very critical is often what happens in some of these hypergrowth setups is the more time you take to build something, often by the time you build it, that problem is not even relevant. Some competitor has already solved it, the customer's behavior has changed. Sort of in some ways, you have missed the bus, right? So being able to minimize this time, being able to act fast, I think is a very, very important skill. And the other lens to apply here is the stakeholders, right? The business folks, the company's leaders, all of them are also very anxious to sort of create impact. I think one is how do you solve dependencies, right? So suppose you have a team which is owning the home page of the app, and there's another team which wants to uh, improve conversion of somebody coming to the app to the time they place an order. And that second team, the conversion team, wants to do something on the homepage. But they have to then discuss with this other team, influence them, align them. All of that takes time. So these kinds of problems tend to be numerous in a company that grows very fast. So the ways we've sort of tried to tackle it, one is what we call source ring fencing, which is basically in that same example, there is somebody in that homepage team who's aligned to this conversion problem, which means that that person is sort of ring fenced to solve this problem. And that person brings the platform perspective of the homepage, but also is aligned to the business problem of solving conversion, right? So there's like a dual hat that person wears, right? And we try to replicate this structure in multiple teams so that this ring fencing can enable us to balance both the platform integrity and at the same time the speed in solving problems. Similarly, the other thing that I think we've done, which also has worked very well, is what we call the pod ways of working, which is basically creating a pod aligned to a business problem, which spans product, engineering, design, business, user research, like all of them being identified together to solve a particular problem, like an acquisition problem or an activation problem, and they all work together for an extended period of time, like 6 months, 12 months, just on this problem area, because we believe that that problem is very important. And all of these people, because they're working together, automatically they start to collaborate better. They have a shared understanding of the business context, right? So creating more and more and more of these pods. Today, I think in Meesho, I don't know the number exactly, but we may have upwards of 30, 40 pods which are operating autonomously across different product areas. Then the other thing also we had to sort of solve as we did all of this is to solve for governance, right? Which is how do you ensure that all of this doesn't become very chaotic? So creating some governance, central team which tracks all of this and so on. So all of these kinds of initiatives have sort of helped drive better communication, collaboration, etc., which is a very, very critical skill. Whenever you build a feature, you take a step back and think about what did you do, right? If that feature worked, then why did it work? If it did not work, it failed. Why did it fail? Like what did not go according to your hypothesis, right? So the deep reflective nature of asking those questions, trying to assimilate learnings from that. I think the best PMs who thrive in this environment do this very, very regularly, almost like every month, every quarter.